Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I used to be afraid of living alone because I was one of those individuals who truly wanted to be alone, to be able to roam about in your pajamas and eat cereal at 2 in the morning. Without passing judgment, I had desired that level of independence. After working 60 hours a week to save as much money as I could from my tiny agency job and graphic design freelance work, I finally signed the papers when I purchased my first home in Gresham Pines, Oregon, 2 years ago. It felt like a victory, though it wasn't large. The 2-story craftsman on a quiet neighborhood with mossy walkways and towering pine trees swaying behind the rear fence was all mine at the time. I'm still single today, and although people often look askance at a woman living alone in a home, I felt prepared that my friends Marcus and Jules helped me with the U-Haul, but they wouldn't let me pay them, so I ordered a bunch of Thai food instead. We sat on the floor of my empty living room, surrounded by boxes, eating pad koo and making jokes about who would find a cursed antique or secret. The rain was falling that misty gentle way the day I moved, as it always seemed to in Oregon. First, Marcus exclaimed, "I swear to God, if you find an old rocking chair in the attic, I'm burning this place down." Julianne chuckled, "It's always the attic's man that all the crawl space. You ever see The Taking of Deborah?" They stayed until almost 10 o'clock, helping me move furniture into position while Marcus used the restroom. "Logan, don't," I pleaded, pointing at her with my chopsticks. "This is my first night in this house. Don't put horror movie ideas in my head." He returned with a frown and said, "Hey, easy. Do you have plumbing in the walls or something?" I blinked, realizing that's usually where plumbing goes. However, I heard a banging sound that sounded more like something within the wall near the sink, not pipes clanking. Perked up and obviously curious, Marcus shook his head slowly and steadily, which would indicate a plumbing problem. I made a mental note to call someone next week to have it examined, and they left. I then walked them out and gave them both a hug. I remained up late unpacking since it didn't feel urgent, so I cuddled up on my bed upstairs with my laptop, half-opened boxes, and a still-rolled rug, while I stood in the driveway for a bit, just breathing in the night. My house and my life. Was relaxing on a pillow while watching a rerun of BoJack Horseman when I heard a monotonous, rhythmic thump. It was subtle but steady, so I stopped the show and sat up. The sound was coming from above, and the house now had an attic that was reachable via one of those pullovers. There should have been nothing but insulation and wooden beams above my bedroom, but there were down ladders in the hallway ceiling. I stood listening, and when the thumping stopped, my mind raced possibly a raccoon or a bird, so I launched my phone's flashlight app. The wooden ladder creaked as I drew it down the hallway attic door. I hesitated, my heart thumping as if it didn't want to be involved. "Don't be crazy," I said. And then I climbed the attic light, which was a dim, flickering bulb hanging on a wire. There was nothing except exposed beams, insulation, and a few enormous, ancient-looking paintings leaning against the far wall that were most likely left there by the previous owner. The room was barely illuminated by thread and the dusty amber glow, and it smelled of mothballs and stale air. Even though they hadn't brought it up, I stood there listening to the silence, which calmed me down. I then went back into the hallway and went to bed, telling myself that it must be the house settling, because 3 nights later I could still hear I called a pest control agency because I was hearing noises above my bedroom every night. Not every hour, but frequently enough that I began to fear the silence. When they arrived the next morning, They discovered no nests, droppings, or gnaw marks, and everything appeared clean. The man suggested that it might just be the wind, of old, would occurs frequently in these older homes, but it wasn't the wind. On the fourth night, I made the decision to look into it further. I went into the attic and made my way to the far wall, where I felt unhappy with the paintings, since they were both heavily framed oils of a forest scene, but I couldn't explain why. One of them was a cutout that was slightly tilted and rested, not quite flat with the wall, so I relocated it behind it. I slipped my head inside and froze. It was a room, a little, concealed space that was perhaps 8 feet long and 6 feet wide. It wasn't a vent or a hatch, but rather a whole square about 3 feet wide that led into another area of the attic that shouldn't have been there according to the house's floor plan. There was a pile of blankets, empty fast food wrappers, an old Hello Kitty pillow that was grey with age and smelled of rot and ammonia, a small mirror that was leaning against a corner, and a broken flip phone next to it. I quickly backed out, my adrenaline pumping so quickly that I didn't even notice the hint of movement behind me. But when I turned around, I saw a woman or possibly a girl with filthy skin pulled taut across her face, like wax paper, huge, red-rimmed eyes, and clumps of stringy hair. She was trembling, and she said, "It wasn't intentional," as she stepped toward me. I gasped and flashed my flashlight. "Stop, who are you?" She lunged, and I screamed as her nails sank into my arms. I gave her a shove with everything I had, and she fell backward, screaming and flailing her limbs. As if I were a puppet, I descended the ladder 2 steps at a time, slammed the attic door shut, and pulled the thread up to prevent her from following. I immediately raced to my room, closed the door, and dialed 911. Delaney was the first person to arrive, and to backup units arrived within 5 minutes. 4 officers arrived with flashlights and rifles drawn, and I waited below, wrapped in a blanket, as the quiet neighborhood was illuminated by red and blue lights. I informed them at least twice that there was someone in my attic, and the woman who had attacked me was ill and not feeling well. Broke with a high, eerie scream, followed by a loud crash, muffled shouts, and the distinctive sound of a taser. Eventually, they descended again, dragging her between them as she screamed and convulsed, spitting blood out of her mouth and biting one officer so forcefully that they had to take her into a cruise ship, where she has been living up to expectations. One of the cops present informed me that Marina Quinn, 32, was obviously shaken and appeared to have been 4 weeks or months. She had a history of substance misuse and mental illness, and her family believed she was dead when she vanished from Portland about 8 months earlier. I hired a contractor to seal off the false wall and install a motion sensor in the attic, because the realtor who sold me the house had not checked the attic after the previous owners left, and I couldn't sleep 4 days because I kept seeing her face every time I closed my eyes. It appears that she has been squatting in foreclosed homes throughout the state. The room above my bedroom has been completely boarded up, and sometimes late at night I can hear scratching up there, but I never go back, and I never leave a room in my house unattended again. I also received therapy for PTSD. Even at 12, I knew I was the type of child who disliked change and preferred the familiar and predictable. But my parents decided to move us out of a rented duplex when my mom got a job offer at a nearby clinic at the small rural town of Brookhaven, from a 3-acre property in northern Mississippi, just outside the village boundaries, to a suburban neighborhood in Arkansas. Everything about it seemed strange to quiet, to empty. The house was old, but it wasn't crumbling or haunted. It was just the kind of building that creaked when it was 2 stories, white with green trim, and backed up to dense woods on 2 sides. There were no neighbors in sight, only gravel roads and trees so dense that you couldn't see more than a few feet in. The floors sloped slightly, and the place smelled like cedar. I recall feeling strange about the move right from the beginning, but I convinced myself it was simply jitters. My 7-year-old black lab mixed dog, Buster, adapted more quickly than I did, sniffing every part of the house as if he was learning it by heart. He always slept in my room, curled up at the foot of the bed, occasionally snoring louder than my dad. I set up my room upstairs, in the back of the house facing the tree line on the first day. We spent unpacking. Mom made spaghetti, and since the table was still in pieces, we ate at the kitchen island. That night, I dozed off with my Game Boy fan under my pillow. At 1:42 a.m. on the second night, Buster curled up at my feet. When I sat up, the antique alarm clock blinked at me, reminding me that the Buster was snarling rather than barking. However, I sat up and muttered, "Buster," as I heard a deep, continuous rumble coming from his throat. His tail waggled against the sheets, but he continued to growl. His ears where his gaze was fixed on the corner of the room near the closet. It was dark, but enough moonlight was coming in through the window to show the outline of my dresser closet door. I turned on my lamp, but nothing changed, so I got out of bed, went over, and opened the closet, taking off my shoes and shirts. I heard him lift his head and sniff the air every few minutes, so I told my dad about it the following day while he was awake. A storage box. "Nothing, come on, dude. There's nothing there," I said, and he looked at me, then back at the corner. Then he whimpered, lay down, and remained awake the rest of the night. He claimed he wasn't accustomed to the new noises here yet when assembling the porch swing, and that he had just heard a raccoon or something. Later that afternoon, a tall, skinny man in his late 60s with sunburns knocked on the front door. "Afternoon," the man began. "My name is Marvin, and I live up the road. I just thought I'd say hello to the new folks." He had grey stringy hair, skin, and grey boots, and was wearing dirty overalls with a limp. He grinned when my dad opened the door. My dad pulled me over and shook his hand. "This is my son Evan." I moved forward and shook Marvin's hand, but his grip was unexpectedly tight. "You're a quiet one," he remarked, laughing. "That's good." He stayed on the porch for 5 more minutes talking with my dad about the weather and wildlife in the area. "We don't get many new families up this way," he said before leaving. "Real peaceful out here to peaceful." I remember not liking the way he looked at me, not because he was assessing me. The following day, my dad was mowing the front lawn while my mom and younger sister went into town to get groceries, and I was playing Pokémon Fire Red on my Game Boy Advance at the picnic table in the backyard. Marvin appeared at the table as if he had been observing me for some time, catching them little monsters. He asked, and I almost dropped the Game Boy. I didn't hear anyone approach. Without asking, that one with the rat thing peak or something. He laughed and sat down at the table across from me. "Pikachu," I said. He said. I tried to laugh politely, but it came out weird. He asked me about school about that. He made a high-pitched squeaky sound that I believe was meant to mimic Pikachu. It wasn't funny, rather, it was creepy, the kind of thing an adult shouldn't do. His voice was low and raspy. Before I could respond, I heard the lawnmower cut off. My dad was standing just inside the backyard, holding the handle, and he was staring at Marvin without smiling. "Hey there," Dad said. My dog asked if my dad ever left the house at night. My dad nodded, but his body language was different, protective, tense. Marvin commented as he walked slowly over and said, "Just saying hey to the boy. Go assist your mother inside." "Evan," he added. "She just came up." I had not heard an automobile, so that was a lie. I stepped inside after leaving the table, acting as though I hadn't heard Marvin. "A few minutes after you said that, Dad entered and inquired, did he just walk into the yard?" "Yes." He remained silent for some time after that. "If he ever comes back around, while I'm not outside, you come get me immediately. Don't talk to him. Just find me." 3 nights later, it happened again to 11A. My Buster sprang up, growling loudly and deep this time, and I sat up in bed, my heart racing. He was at the window, his front paws on the sill, and he was looking out, asking, "What is it?" The window was open a crack, The screen was still in place, and the woods beyond were completely dark when I heard a high-pitched shriek that sounded like someone doing a horrible Pikachu. I muttered as I stood next to him. I slammed the window and sprinted out of my room, shouting for my dad as he emerged from the bedroom, wearing boxes and brandishing a baseball bat. I panted, and he was outside my window, making the Pikachu noise. That was all I could say. Dad. He went outside barefoot, shouting Marvin's name and throwing the flashlight beam into the trees. But no one was there. 15 minutes later, he came back, his face pale and furious, and marched down the dirt road toward what he thought was Marvin's house. But this is when everything fell apart. The house next door. A woman in her 70s who answered the door in confusion and fear stated, "No," adding, "I live here alone. I've lived here for 32 years, and no one named Marvin lives here." My dad went to every house that was visible along the road, but nobody lives here. When my dad called the police at night, they took it seriously. Surprisingly, a patrol car pulled up. An officer took my statement, asked for a description, and it made the local news. I had never heard of a Marvin, and no one who fit that description lived nearby. The closest neighbor, who lived half a mile away, had never seen him either. We fixed new locks, my dad installed motion lights, and we bought a second dog, but I never felt comfortable in that room again, sometimes on summer nights. An unidentified man in rural Brookhaven was posing as a neighbor and may have been trespassing. They never caught him. I swear I could still hear the quiet, high-pitched Pikachu sound coming from the woods when the windows were open, but perhaps that was just my dread playing tricks on me. We stayed there for another year before moving again, and I haven't played Pokemon since. I never imagined that purchasing a home would be the most terrifying choice of my life. In fact, it began as a godsend when I was 28 years old and employed steadily at a digital design company in Evansville, Indiana. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't poor either. My dad made sure of that, but he did well for me. Over the years, he consistently promised to assist me with my first house. When I eventually told him that I was serious about purchasing a home of my own, he placed $40,000 into my account in less than 48 hours. "It's a loan, Jenna," he called, laughing, "but if I could forget to ask for it back if you settle down somewhere nice." I looked at a few homes before choosing a lovely 2-bedroom in the Heather Lane neighborhood. The pricing was reasonable, the neighborhood was quiet, and the house had a cozy old-fashioned feel, and the seller, an elderly man named Charles, appeared truly happy to let it go. His parents had lived there since the 1960s, he claimed, that his father had died somewhere in 2007, and his mother had only recently gone away 3 weeks before to the sale. Charles offered to leave most of the furniture behind, saying, "It's old, but solid," and stated, "Take what you want, toss what you don't. Charm is a little out of date, but nothing I couldn't replace over time." On the day I moved in, my best friends Carla and Evan helped me unload the truck and stayed for a few hours to hang out, order pizza, and look around. I agreed to do less shopping, save more money, and do simple math. Looking down the dark basement, Carla described the house as creepy but cute, comparing it to one of those grandmother homes in horror films. Evan teased, "Come on, this the only things this wonderful house lacks are scented candles and Wi-Fi." We chuckled, and I was glad the living room was already equipped with a sturdy, yet classic sofa set. The only item I didn't like was the rocking chair by the window. It had a faded floral pattern and a worn patch on the backrest that made me think of funeral homes. "Definitely junking that," I remarked, referring to the mahogany coffee table and an upright piano that had seen better days. After Carla and Evan departed that evening, I pulled the rocking chair to the curb by myself, tapping its curving armrest. The trash men wouldn't come until Friday, but I didn't care because I didn't want that item in my house for another 2 days, and I hardly slept. When I wake up, I've unpacked most of the necessities and started tidying the upstairs. There was more there than I realized, including closets full of old blankets, holiday decorations, and dusty books. My sleeplessness strikes in waves. Some nights I'm alright, and other nights I just buzz like a refrigerator. By 7:00 p.m., I was so tired and hungry that I didn't have the energy to cook, so I took my time going through everything and throwing away what I didn't want in black contractor bags. After getting my keys and driving to the small Chinese restaurant off of Glendale, I returned home to find the front door unlocked. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if I had locked it earlier. I usually lock the door, especially now that I live alone, and I felt a strange drop. I stepped inside, put the takeout on the counter, turned on all the lights in the living room, kitchen, and hallway, and then I did the same upstairs, all clear, feeling as though I had hit the bottom of a staircase you didn't know existed. Perhaps I was too exhausted or just forgot. I had only been down there once, during the inspection, but I still needed to check the basement, which was a short, narrow set of stairs behind a creaking wooden door next to the kitchen. It was primarily made of concrete walls, with a washer and dryer setup, some empty shelves, and a water heater that I turned on. As I started to descend the stairs, the light bulb flickered to life, but I stopped short in the middle of the basement, where there was the same old rocking chair with the same cloth and the same faded patch on the headrest. I stared at it for a whole minute. Knowing that I would pull that monstrosity to the eye, backed up slowly and closed the door after feeling the weight of it and hearing it scrape on the driveway the night before. That night, I didn't eat. Instead, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching Parks and Rec reruns at a louder volume than was necessary. On day 3, I woke up at 3:12 on the couch. The home was quiet until I heard a creak, which sounded like an old floorboard being shoved rhythmically back and forth. At that point, I froze. It came from the basement, so I crept to the door and turned the switch, but there was no light. I hurried to the kitchen and got the flashlight from under the sink, and when I got back, I opened the basement door and shone the beam downward, and an elderly woman was sitting in the rocking rocker, with her hands neatly resting on her lap, and her head slowly turning forward until her face met mine. She was slumped over, wearing a pink nightgown that appeared nearly translucent in the light beam, wavy grey hair, glasses, and a flashlight. I dropped the lamp and bolted, babbling something about Anne when 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. We checked the entire house, including the basement, for the intruder, an elderly woman, and the rocking chair I had thrown away. The chair was still there, but there were no other doors, no footprints, and no one had. I didn't like it. Ma'am, the taller officer said, "Are you under any kind of medication or stress?" I replied slowly, "Yes, but I'm telling you I saw her." They drew up a simple report and departed without saying anything more. Around 8:30 p.m. that evening, I located Charles's number in the paperwork and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Charles, I'm sorry to hear that," I said, unable to sleep after that. "I didn't want to startle you, but I saw an older woman in the basement tonight. She had curly grey hair, pink nightgowns, and glasses. She was sitting in the rocking chair that I threw out, and I could hear a long pause. It's Jenna, the person who bought your mom's house. Oh, everything is fine. I kept that chair in the basement 4 years, and she would sit there and listen to my dad play the piano." He remarked that was her favorite chair, and then there was a small whimper. His voice cracked, "And we buried her in that gown. Comprehend?" I whispered, "She loved this place," he said, "loved it so much she refused to leave it even when her mind started wandering. She talked to people who weren't there, said they were guests, friendly ones. Do you think she's—" He didn't answer, but we walked to the basement together after he arrived 20 minutes later, clearly upset. He simply stood there, staring at the chair with shaky hands. "I'm taking this," he murmured quietly. "It never should have been left here." After doing my laundry at Carla's place 4 weeks, I never saw the woman again. There were no noises or movements, but I began to notice odd things. I didn't argue, so I kept the basement door locked. Even though I didn't own anything lavender scented, the hallway would occasionally smell faintly of lavender. The piano would occasionally release a single note late at night, always a G, and occasionally I would discover the basement light bulb slightly twisted, as if someone had attempted to twist it loose, but gave up. But I still lived there for a year and a half, and gradually the anxiety subsided into uneasiness. The house was quiet and serene, but it was never really mine. I currently reside in a downtown condo without a basement or groaning floorboards, but occasionally I think about that house, sometimes on nights when the silence gets heavy. I imagine I hear a slight creaking noise through the vents back, and I think about how her head turned slowly and deliberately toward me, as if she had been waiting for me to see her. This is especially true when I can't sleep. In retrospect, I should have spent that first night in the hotel because something was already off, not because of the lengthy drive, the strange town, or the fact that my new rental home looked like it belonged in a late 1980s drama. Not only with the house, but also with the silence that surrounded it like a warning. My name is Nina Croft, and I'm currently 31 years old, but this incident occurred just before Christmas when I was 29. I had spent my entire life in cities, including Cincinnati, Columbus, and Nashville, so when I received an offer to lead the design team at a startup called Orintech, I had never heard of Willow, Ohio, a dot on the map surrounded by abandoned train tracks and dead cornfields, but I was startled to learn that they weren't based in any metro region at all. Nevertheless, the position paid better than any I'd ever had, and after 2 interviews, we need you here by December 1st. So there was no time to waste. I ended my lease, sold off furniture, and began looking for rentals online in Willow, which has a population of just under 7,000. I received the call for a technical test and a Zoom session with the founders. I discovered 59 Holloway Drive, a one-story, 2-bedroom home with wood paneling, a modest porch, and what the description described as a comfortable, peaceful charm. The town didn't have many listings, and the majority of them were placed on a local Facebook group that appeared to have not changed since 2012. I left Nashville before dawn, and the drive up took longer than anticipated due to freezing rain, road construction, and my own hesitations dragging me down. I signed the year-long lease following a video tour with the landlady, Tracy Meyer, who seemed like a lovely enough woman. And it was nearly 9:00 p.m. when I arrived in Willow. My GPS led me through a drowsy downtown past closed restaurants, and a library that appeared to have not opened in weeks, and the few street lights that were on gave the slick pavements a subtle orange tint, making everything appear dated and sepia-toned. It had been 10 minutes since I had seen another car, and as I turned onto Holloway Drive, my headlights highlighted a small street, lined with identical little houses that were squat, rectangular, and a little bent with age. Mine was the second, from the end, and once I shut the engine and parked in the short gravel road, the silence outside, not even crickets, hit me like a wall. I had only packed the necessities in my truck to suitcases, an air mattress, and some kitchen essentials because the rest would be delivered by the movers later that week. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and entered my new home, which was filled with cold air and the occasional moan of wind through leafless trees. The layout was straightforward, with a tiny living room up front connecting to the kitchen and a long hallway. The house smelled like stale wood and faint mildew, the kind of scent you get from a place that has been empty for too long. The floor was uneven, and every third step made a groaning sound, like someone waking from a long nap. I used my phone flashlight to navigate the hallway that led to the bathroom and to bedrooms. The master bedroom faced the backyard, which was bounded by a short, aging fence. The power was functional, but the majority of the light bulbs were dim yellow or flickered when turned on, so I mentally noted that I needed to replace them. My mother texted me to let us know that you had made it safe. I quickly answered, "All right, just tired, talk tomorrow." I then unrolled the air mattress, in the master bedroom and switched on the pump, which rumbled in the silence. I put on a blanket and a hoodie while it was still calm. When I heard it creak from someplace toward the kitchen, I froze listening to it for warmth because the central heat hadn't yet started. I was sitting on the floor, fatigued. I got up slowly and moved down the hallway after hearing what sounded exactly like one of the floorboards I had stepped on moments before. I turned the switch in the living room, but the overhead light buzzed and remained dark, so I used my phone once more. The front door was still locked, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps the home only needed to settle because it was ancient after all, but the tingling sensation on the back of your neck persisted. I finally returned to the bedroom, where the air mattress was fully filled, and I lay down. I hid my head in the blanket and buttoned up my hoodie tightly, telling myself that I was being dramatic because I was in an unfamiliar environment by myself and was obviously exhausted. Maybe I woke up later, but it was completely dark with no streetlight glimmer. I didn't move at first. Instead, I listened to the same sound. The moonlight through the curtains was so black that it made you feel blind even with your eyes open. But as soon as I entered the room, my stomach fell, and I sat up, holding my breath. I immediately adjusted my eyes to see hazy shapes of the dresser against the wall, the air mattress's corner, and something tall and still by the doorway. I blinked, but the shape remained there, and I watched with my heart racing. I understood it wasn't just a shape when I heard a press-tight squeak, this time inside the room, on a different board close to my feet. The door flung open so quickly that it banged against the wall, letting cold air flood in from the hallway as a towering figure darted out quickly. Like a shadow unspooling in reverse, I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The hallway was empty. The front door was open. The night wind pushed at the curtain. I ran outside barefoot, phone and keys in hand, and jumped into my truck. My fingers fumbled the ignition as I started the engine and backed out. I drove directly to the Willow Police Department, my heart pounding the whole way. Deputy Callahan, the front desk officer, listened patiently as I told him everything, and another officer drove out to inspect the house. They found no evidence of forced entry and no one inside. But the back, Callahan remarked, "We've had that happen before, but why would they come into the room while I was asleep?" He didn't respond at first, but then he continued, "Some people, they may have been staying in the bedroom window that had its lock broken from the inside while the house was empty." Light watching. The following morning, I called Tracy, the landlord, and told her everything. She was appalled and consented to terminate the lease without incurring any penalties. It turns out that her brother had been using I secured a short-term rental in town for the remainder of the month after he left the house for storage until October, but he cursed and locked everything up. Later, I moved into a newer, brighter, less forgotten neighborhood, but I'm still in Willow for work. I no longer walk near Holloway Drive, and I never go to sleep without a motion light outside or a lock on my bedroom door because, even now, 2 years later, I occasionally wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear it again, just one board, one sound, and I question whether he ever truly went. After years of renting apartments in the busier areas of Greenwood Hills, I eventually made the decision to purchase a little single-story house with faded blue siding tucked away at the end of Ironwood Lane. Nothing was supposed to go wrong, because I had just started over. Ironwood Lane, a barely paved road, was on 2 acres and was both practical and sentimental because my mom had died away. It was far enough from the city to feel like I could breathe, but it was still close enough that, with good traffic, I could drive to work in less than 30 minutes. I used my money and a portion of the inheritance to purchase this home the year before, and after she settled her affairs and I realized I had nothing binding me to my small, expensive downtown rental. It wasn't a fancy location, but it was serene and private, at least that's what I thought. There was a sense of calmness that I hadn't realized I needed. I hardly had cell service, and nobody stopped by unexpectedly like in the city. I spent the first few days unpacking, organizing, and standing barefoot on the back porch in the morning with my coffee, just watching the trees. I had just completed dinner, frozen pizza and a glass of wine when I heard the first knock on my third night in the house. It wasn't a loud or frenzied pounding. Rather, it was 3 steady, deliberate knocks. I stopped watching the show and peered out the side window. It was already dark outside, and the porch light was on. An elderly man, possibly in his late 50s, stood motionless on my welcome mat in the dim light. His long grey hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and his skin appeared weathered from years of exposure to the sun. His clothing was a little tattered, with jeans and a plaid shirt that hung loosely on his body. "Evening," he murmured in a scratchy voice, yet even a "hi," I answered. "Can I help you?" He appeared stiff with dirt, and his eyes, though sunken, were shadowed even under the porch light. I opened the door, leaving the screen locked. He added, "I just wanted to say welcome to the neighborhood. My name is George, and I live up the road." "Oh well, thanks. I'm Isa, and I just moved in a few days ago." He nodded slowly, and when he saw the truck, he thought he didn't ask to come in or make any remarks about the house. He just stood there and greeted hello in a flat, unwarm tone. His gaze gave me the impression that he was attempting to learn my face. "Well, thank you for stopping by," I murmured, squeezing the door open. "Little more closed. Nice to meet you." He didn't catch the clue right away. He just remained there for a few seconds longer, like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't decide what at last. He nodded once and walked away without saying anything more. I double-locked the door, something I didn't usually do in the new house. The following day, I had the afternoon off from work and spent it unpacking kitchen supplies and hanging shelves while listening to music. Time until the same slow, heavy rhythm rang out again, so I turned down the speaker and went to the door. George was there, still close and expressionless, so this time I didn't open the door all the way. I said tiredly, "Everything is fine," and he said, "Yes, just." He was basically standing motionless while I was unloading when his eyes darted past me into the home. I moved to block his view and asked, "Do you need anything?" He replied, "Nope, I'm all right." I paused for a long time. "You sure?" I replied more firmly, "But thank you again." And there was the same unnerving pause. Around 9:30 p.m., I was brushing my teeth when I heard it again, but this time it was pounding rather than a knock, so I closed the door without even saying goodbye. The porch light was still on, but I couldn't see well through the curtain because of the shadow that loomed there, greater this time, closer to the front door. I froze, demanding, my heart pounding, and I turned off the bathroom light. The door than before. At first, I didn't say anything. It might have been someone else or not George, but I had a gut feeling that it was him. After 10 seconds or so, he knocked again, with the same rhythm and force, and I finally yelled through the door, "Please leave. I'm busy and uninterested in companionship." He didn't leave this time. Instead, he simply stayed there, and I clutched the doorknob, uncertain whether to open it or call the police. I slammed the door tight and yelled, "Go away," as I caught a glimpse of something metallic glinting at the corner of my eye through the curtain, dimly illuminated by the porch light. It appeared to be the dull silver. When a sheriff's deputy arrived 40 minutes later, George, or whoever he was, had already left. The suspicious man with the knife had come twice and was now hammering on my door. The officer took my statement, walked the property with a flashlight, and promised to patrol more frequently. But when I provided a detailed description, he frowned. "There's no George that lives out here far as I know." He added, "Closest neighbor is 2 houses up. Retired woman, no one matching what you described. Lives nearby." Every sound made me jump that night, so I kept all the lights on. By morning, I felt like I had aged 5 years. I knocked on the woman's door. "Who, no honey," she answered when I inquired about George. "There's no one like that here. We don't get new folks often. Would know." Ellen was a kind, white-haired retired schoolteacher who lived 2 homes up. She looked really worried and clucked her tongue when I told her what had happened. "You be careful," she warned, "because sometimes people wander in from the highway, and this area isn't what it used to be." That morning, I set up inexpensive security cameras that I could watch from my phone. That evening, I didn't receive a knock, but at 1:17 a.m., when my phone buzzed and said motion detected front porch, I opened the feed to see George standing just outside the camera's field of view, silently observing the home. If he were waiting, he remained there for 3 minutes before disappearing into the trees. I had Ellen stay with me for a few hours at night while I spoke with the police again. They were still without leads. I even showed them the video, and they told that he hadn't trespassed yet, but if he tried to enter or stepped on your porch again, don't hesitate to contact 911. The light remained on at 3:42 a.m. when I went to bed early. I was startled awake by the sound of glass shattering, and I quickly fled from the side kitchen window rather than the front. He was inside, and I could hear his slow, methodical steps, the groan of a door hinge, something scraping against the wall, possibly the knife. I muttered to 911, trying not to cry, as I grabbed my phone and rushed to the bedroom closet, my hands quivering. After I gave them my address, I heard him walk down the hallway, breathing as if he didn't care that I had heard the dispatcher say that units were on their way. It seemed like he was playing with me, slowly going into each room, and then I heard voices shouting from the front door. Shortly after, the cops discovered him in the hallway, still holding the knife. He had no identification, no license plate, and the rusted-out van was parked half a mile from my house. There was no address or record, just a man who seemed to be obsessed with me. He never said why he didn't speak at all. He was arrested, but the details stayed murky. The authorities claimed he might have been squatting in the woods nearby, probably off meds, possibly something worse. They couldn't prove intent to kill, but attempted. Burglary weapons charges. I still live on Ironwood Lane, but I've fixed all the windows, upgraded the cameras, got a big dog, and taken self-defense classes. I've stopped answering knocks at night because, even in the most peaceful areas, where the trees conceal you from the outside world, I didn't have much going for me. Immediately after graduation, my communications degree sounded great when I said it aloud, but it wasn't as valuable in the job market as I had hoped, and I had to make student loan payments. My friend Caleb, whom I had known since our freshman dorm days, was in a better position. He had landed a marketing post straight out of school and was already discussing leasing a car when I revealed I was living off cheap pizza slices and mediocre job interviews. He was the one who proposed that we find a home together when I was considering leaving my mom's house. "You cover what you can," he said, "and I'll pick up the rest until you land something decent." I didn't want charity, but I also didn't want to spend another year in my childhood bedroom, so I said yes. We located a modest 2-bedroom house for rent in the Sycamore Hills neighborhood, which is about 30 minutes outside of Knoxville. These homes weren't brand new, but they had character, with large trees, sloping lawns, and winding streets. The rent was a bit higher than I could afford on my own, but if we divided it, it was manageable. Caleb signed the lease, and I sent him half of the deposit. I intended to stay there until I found a full-time job, at which point I would get my own place. The house itself was fine, though a little creaky. It had charm, even though some of the floors bent when you walked over them, and the water heater made an odd clicking noise when it turned on. Caleb claimed a small sunroom off the back as his office right away when we moved in on a Friday, and my mom helped me with that. We spent the most of the afternoon emptying boxes and putting together a coffee table from Walmart that almost put an end to our friendship. At 7 p.m. Caleb borrowed his sister's SUV while I loaded up my car. When Caleb went to collect the food, he noticed a small square note card similar to those you'd get at a dollar store posted to the front door. We had ordered Chinese food and were sweating and hungry when we sat on the floor of the living room watching episodes of New Girl. Thank you was written on it in clean but clumsy handwriting. It was a single sentence that said, "Welcome to the neighborhood," without a name, address, smiley face, or exclamation point. At first, we laughed, and I responded, "Yeah," and Caleb grinned. Caleb's job kept him busy during the day, and I worked nights at a local pizza place. Our schedules were different, so it worked out that we weren't constantly arguing. He threw it on the kitchen counter, and we all but forgot about it for the most part during the first week. Job hunting and my evenings folding boxes and delivering mediocre pepperoni slices. Caleb meanwhile made PowerPoints and answered emails, and occasionally reminded me how corporate life was soul-sucking, but stable. The house settled literally. There were cracks and groans, especially at night, but I figured it was just the old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Didn't cause anything strange until the following Wednesday. I ended my shift at 11 o'clock and pulled into the driveway a little after midnight. I had stopped by the 24-hour gas station on Pinehurst to get a Gatorade, and the house looked the same as usual. Caleb's car was in the dim porch light. When I parked and got out of my car, I saw that the driveway blinds were drawn, but there was a woman standing on the lawn. At first, I thought it was a shadow, possibly a mailbox, the neighbor's garbage can, or a tree. She was standing on the lawn a few feet from our front window, doing nothing but staring at the house. I made a loud, almost instinctive sound that was part warning and half question, but she didn't even flinch when I said, "Hey, can I help?" You were nothing. I approached her slowly at first, trying not to come out as hostile, but then I saw that her eyes were wide and unblinking, right at Caleb's window. "Ma'am." When I reached the edge of the lawn, she turned slowly and left, not running, but walking toward the street, vanishing between the houses on the other side of the street. I stood there for a while, my heart racing, wondering whether she was serious, to call Caleb, but what would I say? A woman was just looking at your room from the yard, so I locked the door behind me and went straight to bed. The following morning, over cereal, I told Caleb what I had seen. Laughed. Man, perhaps she loved the way our curtains looked. I'm serious, it was strange. Did she try to get in touch with anyone? She just stared. Perhaps she's homeless or something. We didn't discuss it much after that, so I tried not to be disrespectful, but I couldn't get rid of the picture of her face in a sweatshirt, still expressionless, like a mannequin. That Friday night, however, something shifted, and I arrived home at approximately 10:30. Caleb texted me earlier to let me know he would be leaving around 8 o'clock and would be making dinner, but as soon as I pulled up to the house, I noticed something was off. More significantly, the front door was wide open, and I froze halfway up the walk. I called out, but got no response, so I took a step closer. Why is the door still open? I took out my phone and texted him, "Dude, are you home?" A moment later, I heard his text tone beep from inside. I cautiously made my way inside, and the living room was dark. The kitchen was dark, but I could see Caleb's phone on the counter with my message on it. I tried harder again, but there was no answer, and worrying quickly set in. Caleb was the most neurotic person I knew. When it came to his bedroom door was slightly ajar, so I pushed it in. The room appeared normal, with a mound of laundry on it, but he would never leave the front door open and leave without his phone. I climbed the stairs, each step a creaking betrayal of my existence, when I heard a whisper, "Is she still here?" The chair and his laptop were blinking on the desk. I turned abruptly, and Caleb's voice came from the closet. He was crouching behind hanging jackets, his eyes startled, and he said, "What the hell? What's going on?" I muttered. "Call 911, he mumbled. Now, Caleb scarcely moved as he muttered that he had arrived home a little after 8, as he had stated, and that he had made a grilled cheese before going upstairs to change. My fingers were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone, but I dialed while we were shut in the closet. He was upstairs when he heard the front door fall open, followed by heavy, slow, purposeful footsteps. His phone was charging downstairs, so he froze and hid in the closet. Whoever it was didn't say anything, just wandered about before turning off. He heard all the lights go to the back of the house, and then there was stillness. He waited for over 2 hours, terrified to move or breathe, until I got home. 5 minutes later, the police showed up, and as soon as they did, we heard footsteps coming from the back hallway. Before they could out the side entrance, 2 officers pursued them down and tackled them toward the garage. It was an elderly woman with matted hair, cuts on her arms, and filth beneath her nails, and she was screaming in wrath. Later that evening, an officer informed us that the thrashing wilded woman, who had no weapons on her, no known residence, no ID, and no medicine or register, had to be restrained in the cruiser. The thing that scared me the most, though, was what Caleb said when we were giving our statements. She never said a word and never made a sound, but I could hear her breathing through the floorboards when I was in the closet. She probably entered the house looking for someone, whether it was one of us or someone who had previously lived there. Long-term residents of that house, Caleb moved in with his girlfriend as soon as the lease expired, and I ended up staying with a cousin in East Knoxville while I looked for better employment. I can't stop thinking about that house, the note, the woman on the lawn, and the burglar. The police never followed up after the original report. There were no updates or news articles, just a persistent worrying that someone is still waiting somewhere in the shadows of another peaceful neighborhood. Were they the same person, or was someone monitoring us from the moment we moved here? I had just turned 23 and was just making ends meet with my customer service work at a nearby internet provider when I moved to Willow Bend, a little, rather dilapidated hamlet tucked between after completing trade school. I moved to hills and cornfields in central Indiana to live with my older brother Matt. Rent was affordable between us, and for almost 4 years, we shared a small, 2-bedroom apartment close to the town's edge. Matt had a steady job and a machinist with consistent hours and greater income, but earlier this year he received an offer for a better job in Chicago, which he had been discussing for months. By the time the lease finished in early September, he was already packed and prepared to leave. "Look, Danny," he said to me as he stacked the last of his boxes. "In the trunk I know money's tight for you right now. You sure you don't want to crash at Mom and Dad's for a bit until you figure things out?" "No," I replied. After he went, I felt the strain since I had 1 month left at the apartment before our lease officially expired, and I couldn't afford to go back, maybe too quickly, but I'm not going backwards. I'll find something even if it's just a room somewhere. He nodded without pushing. I tried searching for roommates, friends, co-workers, and even strange Facebook groups, but nothing worked out because they were too costly, dubious, or too far from work. Then, with just over a week left, I came across an advertisement on a website called Room Nook, which is similar to Craigslist, but is purportedly safer. Listed a basic spare room in a quiet Willow Bend home for $400 per month, utilities included. The listing required that the room be clean and courteous. Evan was half the price of any. I texted the number after seeing the room and asked if it was still available. A few minutes later, he responded, "Yes, it is still available. Would you like to give them a call later?" Around 6 o'clock that evening, Evan spoke in a calm, courteous, and somewhat soft-spoken manner. He explained that he was 35 years old, lived alone, and only rented the additional room in his tiny home since it seemed wasteful to leave it unoccupied. He worked from home as a graphic designer, rarely hosted guests, and made it clear that he preferred a peaceful home. When I requested to see it, he told me he was out of town until the weekend, which was too late for me to wait. He offered to send me pictures and even a video tour, showing me the house, which was older but tidy and uncluttered. White walls, carpeted flooring, and old kitchen cabinets, nothing extravagant, but it looked secure. I asked him questions, and he gave me straightforward, honest answers. He seemed typical, a little dull, but at $400, it seemed like a decent deal. I rented a U-Haul and pulled into the gravel driveway just before noon on Saturday. As we had agreed, the sky was overcast, and the street was deserted except for a child on a scooter and a few parked cars. 2 houses down, the house was smaller in person, with pale yellow paint and a narrow porch with chip steps, and to front windows with the curtains drawn. The garage was open, and Evan was standing there waving. He appeared to be about what I would have expected, averagely built, with dark jeans, short brown hair, and a little stubble. There was nothing menacing about him, Danny correct. Yeah, once again. Thank you for allowing me to move in on short notice, he said, shaking hands. He gave a quick smile, and courteous, no issue. Would you like a brief tour before we unload? Yes, of course. The inside my room, which was at the end of the corridor beyond the bathroom, had a window, a twin bed frame, and a closet. The walls were plain, but you could decorate it any way you wanted. It matched the photos, was clean, and had a slight scent of lemon cleaning. He added that Mikasa is Sakasa. I grinned and said, "Thank you, this really works great for me." We unloaded everything in about an hour, and Evan didn't say much, while he helped. His only words were careful, watch the corner, and so on. By 8 p.m, after dropping off the U-Haul and finding a ride back, I was exhausted. Evan was sitting on the couch watching a show, but he wasn't hostile, just aloof. On my way to my room, I waved to him during the Wheel of Fortune replay, saying, "Hey, I'm turning in early for the long day." "All right," he answered, not looking away from the TV. I just unpacked. My desk was still in bits in the corner, and I had enough to put up my mattress and bedding. At about 9:15, I got up to lock the bedroom door, but I froze when I realized there was no lock. In fact, there was a lock, but it was on the outside of the. I blinked at the door for a moment before opening it and peeking out into the hallway. The bathroom light was on, but the house was silent. "Hey Evan," I said softly as I entered the living room, and he turned to face me, eyes a bit distracted, as if I had roused him from a trance. "What's up?" "My door's lock is located on the exterior." He blinked once and added, "You think you could switch it around tomorrow?" "Yeah, sure," not even realizing it was like that. "I'll flip it," he continued, nodding in an attempt to dismiss it. "Thank you." I went back to my bed and closed the door, but it wasn't easy to fall asleep. At 3:17 a.m, I looked at my phone and heard footsteps faintly creaking over the kitchen floor and padding slowly down the hall. The footsteps stopped just outside my door, and I thought it was simply Evan getting water or visiting the restroom. My chest constricted, and I remained motionless in bed, watching the silhouette of my door, which was hardly visible in the street light coming through my. Then I heard a click, and my heart began to pound. I hurried to the door and tried the knob, but it was locked, and I waited until I heard his footsteps recede down the hallway. A door then gently closed, stood motionless for what seemed like an eternity before muttering, "What the hell?" Evan opened the door after I knocked loudly enough to catch his attention. He unlocked the door after a few seconds of hesitation, and I flung it open, my face flushed with adrenaline. "Why did you lock me in?" Evan looked shocked, and I didn't mean to. I just listened. There was silence, followed by quick footsteps. "It's nothing, but I get anxious when you're unfamiliar to me, so I wanted to feel secure, so I locked myself in." I snapped, and he scratched his temples. I know it was stupid, but I wasn't considering leaving the door open going forward. Evan didn't protest, and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Instead, I sat on the couch with a blanket sitting rigidly till the U-Haul location. I swear, I stared at him and tried to read his face. It wasn't anger or guilt, just plain discomfort. I'm moving out in the morning. Opened at 9 a.m. I drove the truck back to the house, and because Evan's door was closed and the corridor was quiet, I began moving my belongings with tunnel vision, gathering everything I could and carrying it to the vehicle. I stood in the doorway, stunned, not having heard Evan leave, not seeing a car, not even hearing the front door open, when I noticed something odd halfway through. Evan's door was wide open now, and his room was empty, no clothes, bed, boxes, or computer, just us lines where furniture used to be. Yelled at me to finish packing quickly, so I hurried through the final 2 boxes before returning for the second to last one. Evan was suddenly blocking the front door in the hallway, so I firmly shouted, "Move," and he gazed at me blankly for a while before stepping aside and pushing past him. I contemplated leaving the final box, which contained only some pantry food, but as I got into the truck, Evan unexpectedly showed up in the rear with it. "You forgot this," he said. "Thanks," I muttered, and he held it up to me as I turned to set it down. I heard a pull on the metal door as he attempted to close it, so I turned around and said, "Don't," halfway. Evan's face twitched, and he fled into the woods behind the property rather than into the house. I slammed the truck door shut and drove away without turning around, allowing me to crash at his old. I never returned to Willow Bend, never saw Evan again, and never figured out what was behind that locked door or what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night. But occasionally I still wonder what kind of person puts a lock on their flat till I found somewhere else, the outside of a stranger's door, and what they intended to do with it initially. My name is Claire Jensen, and I was 29 when I moved into my first house by myself after receiving a promotion. At the time, I wasn't even sure I could afford a house. I worked for a small financial company in Oregon, so my income eventually increased to the point where I could buy things, even though they weren't completely comfortable. I didn't have any family close by, and the majority of my friends had either gone out of state or started children of their own, but I wasn't afraid of being alone if anything. A modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch-style home in a quiet residential area just outside of Pendleton, where snow covers everything in the winter and neighbors wave from across the street, but don't really knock unless there's a reason, is what I bought, and I'm looking forward to the peace. The backyard was larger than I had anticipated for my budget, and the previous owners had left a charming but weathered wooden swing set. The closing process took longer than I had anticipated, and I didn't receive the keys until mid-December, by which time the snow had already accumulated in deep layers. When I pulled into the driveway that morning, it was cold, cloudy, and absolutely silent. I couldn't afford movers after the down payment and initial costs, so I handled everything by myself. I had packed my small SUV full of boxes and borrowed a lot of money. In order to avoid the storm that was predicted later that night, I got up before sunrise to move furniture from a friend's old truck. By the time I shoveled the driveway and began carrying things in my gloves were already soaked, and I slipped on the ice patches multiple times, yelling obscenities even though no one could hear me. It was approximately 5 p.m. My muscles ached by the time I dragged in the last of it, a drooping bookcase that hardly fit through the front entrance, but because there was no nearby takeaway and no dishes had been unloaded, I just dragged the couch cushions into the living room, got a blanket from my trunk, and decided to eat a leftover burrito from the cooler I brought in the microwave while standing in the kitchen. I had running water, electricity, and Wi-Fi, but the bed wasn't built yet, and all of my clothes were still in boxes. Around 11:30 p.m., I crashed there for the night. As I was falling asleep, I heard a crunch, and it was clearly someone walking across snow in slow, purposeful steps, not an animal. I didn't have curtains on the windows in the living room yet, so I waited 4 minutes without doing anything. It wasn't the wind that made me freeze and pull the blanket tighter. Instead, my heart was hammering in my ears. The sound stopped just before it reached the porch. I closed my eyes and somehow fell asleep, convincing myself that I was simply exhausted and imagining things. I woke up to bright sunlight coming in through the windows and a splitting headache from the cold. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, but something felt strange, and I noticed that the front door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it the previous evening, so I double-checked it after putting in that final bookcase. Wide-eyed, I hurried over and examined it again, and sure enough, it was completely closed, but the bolt was not turned. I opened it carefully and went outside. With the exception of the tracks I had left yesterday, which were now covered in a thin coating of fresh snow, there were no footprints or anything around the porch. Perhaps it had snowed again overnight and wiped everything away, or perhaps I had imagined the sound. That was the explanation I gave myself for the following several days. Days were spent unpacking and making small adjustments. On the second day, I received banana bread from my neighbour, Marlene, a retired teacher in her mid-60s who was sweet and talkative. She also cautioned me about the slippery street corners. By the third night, everything appeared to be normal. Prior to that Friday, I had spent the majority of the day constructing IKEA furniture. At around 6 o'clock in the evening, I made the decision to quickly grab dinner from a drive-through that was 15 minutes away. I was only gone for perhaps 40 minutes when I returned. Upon returning home, I discovered something that made my stomach turn. Footprints in the snow. They were clear and led from the curb to my front porch, and they weren't only fresh, no snow had fallen since the morning, and the prints hadn't even begun to melt yet. I walked carefully up to the porch, following the prints, and they stopped at my door just like previously. I reached out and tested the doorknob, but it was unlocked again, and this time I remembered feeling sick to my stomach. The neighborhood was silent, and there were no people outside. I remembered to lock it, and I went through the entire house, room by room, making sure that all the windows were closed and all the doors were locked. I found no evidence of anyone breaking in, and I didn't get much sleep that night. On Saturday morning, I went to the hardware store and got a new deadbolt, which I had installed by noon. I also got a simple indoor camera and aimed it at the entrance. That evening, I sat in bed and browsed Zillow listings for homes with second story, bedrooms or gated fences, and all of a sudden, my place didn't feel as secure as it had. Then Sunday arrived, and I was brushing my hair and taking a warm bath when I heard a faint creaking sound coming from downstairs, like the floorboards at the front door. I switched off the bathroom fan and heard another creak, and I gently left the room, stood on the stairs, and from that vantage point, I could see the foyer below. A man with a dark jacket, jeans soaking to his knees, and snow flowing from his boots was standing just inside the door, standing still. The front door was open behind him, and I gasped. I sprinted back into the bathroom and locked the door, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I could hear the man moving now, taking slow steps across the floor. If he was simply investigating, I contacted 911, and the dispatcher kept me composed by asking for, when the police arrived, they found no one, so they informed me the footprints went to my address. If I could still hear him, I nodded as though she could see me, and then there was a slamming bang, no more footsteps, no creaks, just stillness. They didn't recognize the man from my camera footage either. It had only caught his back as he entered. I changed the locks once more, upgraded the security system, and purchased motion detecting lights for the outside. But nothing else changed. I went up to the house, and then down the sidewalk toward the trees at the end of the street. There were no more footprints, unlocked doors, or nighttime noises, but I was still unable to unwind and fall asleep unless I had triple-checked every door. I began sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed, and I would jump whenever I heard with the furnace running and me flinching every time the wind shifted the trees outside my window. I considered selling the house, but I couldn't afford to pay off the mortgage so soon after moving in, so I stayed and waited for the door knob to turn at 3 in the morning to see that jacket again, and to hear footsteps on the porch. However, he never returned, which is worse in some ways, because I'm always wondering what he was going to do and why he stopped. I'm Leah Torres, and I probably don't know, but I still checked the door 4 times every night just in case. I never imagined that I'd be 30 years old and starting over with just a used U-Haul full of used furniture and a duffel bag full of clothes. I just moved to Maple Hollow, a small town in upstate New York, when my landlord in Buffalo chose to sell the duplex where I had lived for 5 years. There was no discussion or other options. The lease ended, and I was evicted. At first, I was upset, but perhaps it was I spotted a rental listing for a recently constructed home in Maple Hollow that was charming, quiet, and only an hour away from my job at a remote counseling center. It looked too good to be true, with big windows, a garage, a fenced backyard, and a cul-de-sac location surrounded by. It was January when I moved in, and the house smelled like new paint and carpet. The landlord, Mr. Finley, seemed like a decent person who lived 2 towns over and remotely managed a few properties. The rent was reasonable. The neighbor across the street had his house at an angle from mine, but within the first 48 hours, I spotted him. He hung low and gloomy, but that only made my new house feel cozier. I felt like I had turned a page and it was mine, at least for the time being. I remember how he looked the first time I saw him, standing just outside his door with his arms crossed and staring straight at me as I brought a lamp inside the house. It was a single-story house with ancient siding and a front lawn that was mostly made up of brown spots and frozen dirt. I still don't know his name. Offered him a courteous nod, but he didn't wave or smile, just icy eyes and still lips. It's strange, but some individuals are just socially awkward, whether he was retired, disabled, or simply inquisitive, but it kept happening every time I walked outside. He was constantly standing in his driveway or behind his front window curtain, getting groceries from the car, checking the mail, and shoveling snow off the walkway. Perhaps he was just curious. On Friday, my college best friend Maria told me over the phone that small towns are like that. You're the mystery. I laughed, trying to let it go. Yes, but I saw him standing in his driveway at around midnight without a coat. Maria stopped, and that's even worse. I left it there so as not to spiral. The weekend arrived and went, and I became preoccupied with my work, which was all done remotely. I conducted grief counseling via Zoom, which meant I spent a lot of time at home thinking about myself, but I couldn't stop seeing it every day, morning or night, regardless of the time of day. I even tried peeping between the slats without turning on the light, and sure enough, he would be there if I stared out the front window long enough. No mail ever arrived at his house. No lights ever turned on inside. No guests. No shipments. The man was dragging a ladder over his lawn on Tuesday night, and I was microwaving dinner when I heard a strange scraping sound outside. It sounded like something heavy being carried across the driveway. I went into the living room and peered through the blinds to see why. I thought he could be fixing something, but it didn't make sense, so I saw him walk it around to the side of his house at around 11:30 p.m. But then the next morning, I made the mistake of opening my curtains, and he was standing at the end of my driveway, less than 20 feet away. He vanished into the darkness, and I remained there for a minute, half frozen, half waiting for a punchline, but nothing came. I called Maria again, but his voice was shaking, and he was just standing there staring straight into my window. His eyes didn't move when I opened the curtain, or I froze under the crunching snow, stayed in bed, and tried to control my breathing. After 5 minutes of silence, I couldn't stand it any longer, so I snuck to the back window and peered through the side to see him, at the far side of the house, half-darkened yard, standing motionless in front of me. I quickly retreated and called 911. The police arrived 15 minutes later, checked about, and asked me a few things. The man left, so I informed them about the technically your backyard is fenced. If he were inside, that would be. One of the neighbors said, observing the driveway, the footprints, and the ladder. They were courteous, but I could tell they weren't going to do anything because he hadn't done any crimes. Trespassing. but there were no footsteps in the snow that we could observe. The snow had mainly melted over the day, but it was still frozen and spotty, so naturally there were no prints the following day. I wanted to scream. I emailed Mr. Finley to inquire about whether he had cameras installed outside the property. He said that he did not, but he offered to have someone come and install them for a fee. I turned him down, and by the second week, I hardly left the house unless I had to go into the garage, which made me feel as though I was being watched. I kept a pocket knife on me, checked my locks every night, and purchased blackout curtains, but none of that helped, having the impression that you were living next to a shadow that never blinked. Then on Thursday, the worst night of all, I had a lengthy video call that concluded after 11 p.m. and went directly to bed, weary, without even eating. I sat up in the middle of the night when something smacked against the house's side with a deep hollow thump. It was hammered once again, just beyond the wall of my second-floor bedroom. That made little sense, so I crept toward the window while standing slowly and gasping for air. I yelled as I drew the curtain aside an inch, revealing his face. He stood on a ladder just inches from me, gazing through the glass. Ladder I hadn't seen since he pulled it across his lawn that evening, and when I yelled, he didn't bat an eye, simply met my gaze, with me as if it didn't matter. So I retreated, tripped over my bed's corner, and fumbled for my phone before I heard the ladder being moved and the metal scratching against the siding as he attempted to bring it down before they phoned 911. When they got there, they saw him pulling the ladder just outside his house. He claimed to be cleaning something, but he wouldn't explain why. He was released since they were unable to charge him with anything more serious than trespassing. The following morning, a woman in her late 40s knocked on my door. "You're Leah," she said, wearing a cardigan. "I live down the street," she said kindly. "I just wanted to note that last night I saw the police here. Was it the man across the street?" I slowly nodded, and she moaned and turned away. "He's done things like they formerly belonged to a different family who lived next door and was constantly observing us. I once saw him attempting to open our back gate, but when we informed the police, they said they were powerless to stop him." My jaw tightened in the absence of evidence. Why hadn't anyone warned me? She looked down. "I broke the lease and packed everything within a week, so perhaps we should have." The landlord wasn't shocked when I paid 2 months' rent for a new apartment in a busier location. His voice was low as he remarked, "You're not the first person to break the lease in that house," adding that everyone who rents there only stays for a few months. I was unable to determine why. I occasionally didn't respond when I close my curtains for the evening or take a late walk home. I get that old, familiar feeling that someone is watching me. Though I sincerely hope it's simply trauma, I'm not entirely sure because I still have that I snapped the picture outside my house where the police never inquired for his face, smiling from a second-story window. I moved into my new place, a 4th-floor apartment in a mid-rise building just outside Albany. Busier streets, brighter lights, neighbors I could hear sneezing through the walls. I thought that would help. I thought noise meant safety. For a few weeks, it did. I made a habit of walking the halls before bed, double-checking that the chain was on the door, even pushing a small cabinet against it just in case. I had a view of the city skyline now. I slept with the blinds open, foolishly thinking the city lights might chase away whatever shadows still lived in my head, until the picture framed. It was a Thursday morning when I noticed it, one of those cheap black 5x7 frames that had come with a set I bought from a home goods store. I had placed it on a shelf near my desk and filled it with an old photo of my college friends at a Halloween party. I'd looked at it 100 times, but that morning the photo inside was different. It had been replaced, not photoshopped, not altered, but replaced. Same frame, same smudges on the glass, but now it showed a grainy picture of me taken from outside my previous house in Maple Hollow. Through the living room window, I was sitting on the couch, unaware, holding my phone, staring into the screen. I staggered back and nearly knocked the shelf over. My breath left my chest so fast I couldn't scream. I yanked the back of the frame up and expecting some kind of prank, anything to explain it. But it wasn't a printed photo tucked into the backing. It was part of the frame, sealed, as if it had always been that way. I threw it away. That was my first mistake. The second frame appeared 2 days later. This one was lying face down on my welcome mat when I came home from the store. I hadn't ordered anything. No neighbors saw anyone drop it off. Inside it, a different photo got me standing on the fire escape, lighting a cigarette sometime last week. Another picture I didn't know had been taken. That night, I started hearing knocking. 3 soft taps. Always at 3:41 a.m. Once from the front door. Once from the wall near my bathroom mirror. Once from the inside of the hall closet. I moved the cabinet in front of the door. I slid a knife under my pillow. I stopped checking the peephole because once, at 3:41 exactly, I did, and all I saw was the top of someone's head, just hair. As if they knew I'd be watching, I stopped sleeping. I started forgetting things, appointments, meetings, texts I swore I sent. I called my therapist and sobbed during our session, telling her about the pictures, the knocking, the hair. She said trauma does that. It lingers, warps things. Maybe I imagined it. Then she paused. Leah, did you say you moved into Unit 4B? I froze. Yeah, why? More silence. I had a patient 3 years ago who lived in that exact apartment. Young guy. Nice. But he left town suddenly. Wouldn't say why. Just said someone kept leaving things for him. On the window sills. On his pillow. What things? Pictures. She whispered. I didn't sleep after the call with my therapist. I kept replaying her voice, shaky, unsure. Pictures. Left on his pillow. I checked every inch of the apartment that night. Dresser drawers, cabinets, even the space beneath the fridge. Nothing. Until the morning. I woke up on the couch, just after sunrise, my neck stiff and my arms crossed tightly across my chest. I didn't remember falling asleep, but worse, there was something on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. A frame. Same kind, black, slightly cracked in the upper right corner. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe. From across the room, I could already see it wasn't a photo of me this time. It was someone else, a woman maybe in her 50s, sitting at a kitchen table, pale, dressed in a bathrobe. Her hands were resting flat on the wood, and she was staring straight ahead like she was listening to something. Or someone. There was something scratched into the frame's glass. Can you hear it too? I shoved the whole thing into a garbage bag, tied it shut, and ran it down to the dumpster behind the building. But when I came back upstairs, my apartment door was open, just a few inches. Just enough. Inside. Nothing was taken, but the bathroom mirror was fogged up. Like someone had just been inside while I was gone. I hadn't taken a shower. I hadn't even turned on the sink, but there were words written in the condensation. She never left. That night, I sat in the hallway 4 hours with my back against the door, every light on, knife in hand, no sound, not even traffic. I wanted to believe this was a breakdown, that I was unraveling. But I knew deep down I was being watched. Not just watched. Studied. The next day, I tried to get the leasing office to let me move units. They said they were full, that I could break the lease if I paid the penalty. But I couldn't afford it. I asked the woman at the desk, "Do you know who lived in 4B before me?" She hesitated. Lots of tenants come and go. I leaned forward. What? About the guy 3 years ago? She looked away, then picked up a folder and flipped through it quickly. You'd have to ask the manager. I did. The manager didn't exist. No one at the leasing office could tell me who I signed the contract with. No one remembered the showing. One of the receptionists claimed the previous manager moved to another state. The other one said she was let go. Neither could explain why the office had my file under a unit labeled 4A. I showed them my lease. Clear as day. Unit 4B. They both looked at each other, pale, and one of them whispered, "There is number 4B. That unit's been vacant since before the remodel. I didn't go back upstairs. I packed my car with whatever I could fit, left everything else behind, and drove. But last night at a highway rest stop somewhere outside Rochester I stopped for coffee. There was something waiting on the passenger seat when I returned, a black frame. This time, the photo was of me in the rest stop bathroom mirror, and in the fall behind me, scratched into the glass, still listening.